Steve Meadows, my old boss, and one of the best I've had.
You're very kind.
You are where your heart belongs, aren't you?
I am.
Because you are now responsible for beef activities and bull testing at Clemson, and I think that's kind of where you started out not so very many years ago.
About 28 years ago, I started out as the beef cattle agent, and have always had my concentration in beef cattle and love of heart for beef cattle and beef cattle producers. And on the genetic side, certainly that's where I've concentrated, and it's a very rewarding career to see it work.
Tell me how it's changed over that time period, Steve.
Wow.
It sounds like it was pretty much just kind of backyard pasture activities to rocket science.
Years ago, when I started out, there was no genomic enhanced selection criteria. There was nothing. You did a visual appraisal of the animal. You could see how fast it grew or didn't grow, or maybe how thick it was, but yet you didn't know how much of that thickness was actual fat, how much was muscle. Now we have ultrasound equipment. We can readily detect that. We can do genetic DNA composition on the animals and tell honestly how they're going to perform in the future, as well as their progeny will perform in the future. So it truly has been from a covered wagon to rocket science, and it changes every day.
The aspect of it that the farmers directly deal with mostly is the bull testing programs, and I think you have two separate ones.
Correct.
One down in my part of the world in Blackville at the Edisto Rec, and then the other on campus. And so let's start with the one that's down in Blackville and talk about how that program of bull testing works.
That program started, I believe, Amanda, in 1982, 1983. It was established as one of the first, if not the first, forage-based bull test station where producers from all across the country, if they wanted to, could consign their best purebred bulls to come there, and we would test those bulls on grass, how well they grew over a 168-day period. And that has a long and storied history there at that test station, and it still continues today. And today it is one of only two, of my knowledge, left in the nation that is 100% forage-tested bulls during that 168-day period.
So you pre-select the best material, best cattle to start with, and then you actually keep records and see how well they perform, how much they gain, and you test to see what percentage of fat and muscle because you have ratios that are preferred.
We do. There are minimum criterion to get the bulls into the test station to start with. We have what we call minimum weaning weights, minimum yearling weights, and then ratios, where we compare each bull against the other as their own test. And usually at the end of the day, at the end of the test, 1/3 of the bulls will not make the actual sale, just because, they have counterparts that were better than they were for gain or for muscling or for whatever measurement traits you may want to, take forward.
And what is the reason that forage, and I'll let you explain to people exactly what forage means, why there's a niche market and we need to separate the two markets of forage and a more mixed grain feed?
Sure. There's a strong and growing niche market for grass-fed beef in the country. A lot of people are concerned of how the feedlot type cattle are developed.
Yes.
And others aren't.
Yes.
And for
it's
those,
a matter of preference.
That's correct. And for those it's a matter of preference. It's a matter of taste. The grass-fed product does have a different taste, but the grass-fed product has a little different amino acid makeup, if you will, more similar to that of fish. So some of the makeup.
Some people, for dietary reasons, might prefer to make that choice.
Correct. Dietarily speaking, some people, quite frankly, do not want the marbling or the fat that is contained within grain-fed beef, where grass-fed beef doesn't have it. It's a much leaner product.
And they can, in the summertime, be on a pasture, but then other things that are included in forage can be hay that was cut or even silage that did not include any genetically modified materials.
That's
Is that correct?
That's
okay.
correct. It can be silage, various amounts of hay. It can be baleage, just as long as it's a forage-based product, which could be, bale wheat. It could be bale coastal Bermuda, alfalfa. just a large array of forages can constitute that definition of forage finish.
And then up on the campus, more traditionally, people use grains as a supplement. So let's talk about the program that takes place there. And apparently, there's a fascinating computer system. And y'all know it would be awful if if I were on a diet and you had me on that diet. You would know every time I slipped and took a little bite of a cookie, wouldn't you?
Yes, we would. Each bull has what we call an EID, it's an electronic identification tag in its ear. And when it sticks its head in there, the reader automatically detects how much consumption that bull takes in. It will read 10,000 pieces of data per second.
Wow.
So we know which bull's eating what, how much they eat during the period. But the cool thing about the Clemson test, it is the only one east of the Mississippi River that has the Grow Safe system where we can measure feed efficiency on the bulls, where it doesn't take as much corn or grain byproduct to get that gain, on that animal, that pound of gain on the animal. So it takes less product, if you will.
Just like with the farmer, I mean, if we have a more efficient variety of a crop to grow that uses less fertilizer, we have more room for profit. The same thing would happen with an animal.
That is correct. That is correct.
And then but you said that beyond that y'all now have genetically modified tests that can actually predict how successful the offspring of these animals under consideration will be before they're even born. That's the most fascinating thing. Expound on that a little bit for us.
That's the thing that I said we went from the wagon to rocket science.
That is really
and really the learning curve and how fast it came was amazing. And now it's almost looked at as everyday practice. What used to be, wild is now common, and it changes every day. But there's tests, different companies that do these tests for you, and you just send in a little droplet of blood or a follicle of hair, and they can send back to you what we call genetically enhanced EPDs, which is expected progeny differences, how those calves will differ out of a certain bull or a certain female. And it is as accurate as keeping that animal 10 to 20 years and measuring her progeny. We can take that blood sample or that hair sample when that calf is 6 months old, and we have a much higher accuracy than we would just the same as waiting 10 years to see what happened. So we can speed up the genetic improvement.
I believe that with all the absolute scientific research you gather, there still is a little bit of hands-on.
Thank goodness.
Visual.
I'm still old school.
Yeah, thank goodness.
I still believe the master with the right eye for selection. There's certain things that, we can't measure genetically. We have to evaluate the physical structure of that entire animal. Can it walk? Is it mean? Is it going to run you out of the pasture?
Yeah.
If it is, you don't need it. DNA will not test that. You climbing the fence getting out of the way will test that. So, there's still some of the old school, married, if you will, with the advancements that came about in genetics and other management techniques that make it fun.
So the cattle at the end of the evaluation period are given an assignment. Some of them we say are not worthy of being used. And do they go back to the owner, or are they then sold to people who want to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to get superior breeding stock?
Typically, the animals that do not make the test, most of the owners will take them back home, and they may have a market for those animals.
Yes.
But the 2/3 of the animals that make our 2 tests, they sell through our auction. And Clemson has the upcoming test or the sale February 4th. I'm very close on that. Those will go to farmers usually within 4 to 5 states, and they will go into herds to, hopefully improve genetically the base of those females that are in that herd through that bull and produce a better product for the consumer, better eating experience, maybe higher growth, just whatever trait the farmer's looking for. There's an array of data for them to weigh out when they get there.
When we look at our farming community overall, how many people, what percentage, and how important is the livestock industry, the cattle industry?
Including poultry, livestock is the largest industry in this state.
Is it?
in agriculture, including poultry. Poultry is a big chunk of it.
Yes.
But the beef cattle industry falls in that fourth and fifth range of importance.
Still
within,
very important.
You know, with the cotton, peanuts, tobacco mixed in. But cattle and dairy are going to fall somewhere in the 4, 5, 6 range, depending on the market. But
and of course, certain parts of the state, the land is more
sure.
appropriately used for grazing than it would ever be for row
The
cropping.
upstate,
Yeah.
very eroded land.
Yes.
You know, from 200 years ago. And really all it's good for, some of the land is to grow grass. And it's wonderful because the cows can take a protein within that grass that you and I would starve to death on, turn it into a wonderful edible product that's very healthy for the consumer. And that most of our cattle you will find, just like you said, concentrated in that upstate area.
And it's interesting too because of course now we see some of the advanced farms even have ways of managing the waste from the cattle to refurbish and fertilize the fields.
Correct.
It's a complete cycle in
It
some
is.
cases.
It's a very holistic cycle, if you will, because the farmers, the beef cattle farmers, operate on a very narrow margin of
Yes.
profit. Right now the markets are very tight. 2 years ago we had very good markets and we're doing really well. Market is down 30-40% from where it was just 2 years ago. You may not see that in the meat counter, but they
the
see it when
farmers
they
see
sell
it,
their
yeah.
product. So anything they can do to recycle the nutrients into that production system certainly behooves them as well as the environment as well as the market.
Well, Steve, it's fascinating, and it makes me proud to hear that we've got people coming from 4 and 5 states away
We do.
to take advantage of research that a relatively small state is conducting. And it means to me that some of the beautiful lands that we pass when we get off the big highways and on the back roads, that these lands will be able to stay in agriculture thanks to the foresightedness of people like you, and I thank you for what you've done.
Well, we thank y'all for everything, and Clemson University is certainly dedicated to the farmer of this state, and I think it's evident by their investments.
Thank
Thank you, Amanda.